I think at this point, let's end my waffle and get onto the real meat of today's conversation, which is the HR Shared Services Trends Report 2024. So I'm going to turn into voice of God, switch my camera off, and if you need me, give me a shout. Over to you, Ems.
Thank you very much, Chris, and welcome to everybody who's joined us live today on our webinar, and also those of you who might be listening in post today's webinar as well. It's fantastic to see so many of you and have you join us here. So before we get into some of the highlights from our biannual survey that we do around HR Shared Services trends, I wanted first of all to introduce my co-host, Dawn Goodall. She's my partner in crime for all things HR Shared Services here at LACE. And then also to introduce our two guest speakers today. So we have Jo Wilkes joining us from UCL, and also Liam Thompson joining us from Utilities Warehouse. So Jo and Liam, if you could briefly do a quick intro to sort of your role, the scope of maybe the teams that you manage within both organisations that you work with, and then we'll delve into some of the key findings from the report.
Okay, cool. Shall I go first, Liam? Hi, everybody. Nice to welcome you to this session today. My name's Jo Wilkes. I'm the HR Services Director at UCL. UCL is steeped in history. It was founded in 1826. We've got 50,000 students. We've got 17,000 staff. I love it. I love it at UCL. I've been there about 18 months. My role sits as part of the Professional Services Hub, and I look after the HR transactional activities. I look after payroll, lucky me. I've got a small workforce reporting and analytics team, and I've also got responsibility for visa immigration compliance and the end-to-end employee life cycle. The role that I fulfill sits, as I said, in the Professional Services Hub, which is actually outside of the central HR. So the model is all the transactional activities take place in the hub alongside financial operations, so credit control, AP. And we've also got a service excellence part of the hub, business operations services, and one desk, which is sort of like our triage help desk. And I work really, really closely with the central HR team, and that's made up of what you'd normally expect around your centres of excellence. So your OD, reward and benefits, and HR business partnering. Lots of challenges for us, which we can talk about later, but I think that's probably enough waffle about me. Over to you, Liam.
Thank you, Jo. Good afternoon, everyone. Really delighted to join. So, as Emma said, Liam Thompson, Head of People Services at Utility Warehouse. I have been in the role for just over 3 years, really enjoying my role, like Jo. We're a multi-service provider. We are smaller than UCL. We have around 3,000 headcount. My role involves the employee lifecycle end-to-end. The team look after all of our core services, policy, process, compliance, and then also stretch out into supporting other specialisms alongside my wider colleagues in the people team, such as employee relations, people data and analytics, our advisory services. So a bit of a hybrid role, a bit of a mini matrix structure, but all featuring as part of a key part of my role. So really delighted to join today. Look forward to it.
Thank you very much, both. And we will definitely delve into some of your perspectives, some lessons learned, some of the challenges that you've been facing, and some of the things that you're actually doing on the various topics that we're going to cover from our report today. Before we delve into the headlines, I guess some of the key findings from the research that we've done, because we could spend probably 2 hours, if not longer, to be honest, going through all of that, I just wanted to give a brief overview of the context to the research for those people who might not have had yet a chance to read the report itself, or maybe have not seen our previous reports in this space. So we started doing research around the HR shared services trends specifically in 2020. So at that time, we were really looking at what is the future of HR shared services, and I guess very much starting to challenge some of the preconceptions or maybe historical views that HR shared services was more of an administrative function to support HR. And that report at that point in time was all around ambition, getting a bit of energy into that space. And the title of the report was The Future of HR Shared Services, Becoming People Experience and Solutions Experts. So you can kind of see where we were trying to go with, I guess, the ambition around the future of HR shared services there. We've done this report every 2 years since, so 2020, 2022, and now 2024. So we gathered our data set just up to Christmas, so sort of 4 weeks up to Christmas last year, launched this report in March this year, and we're therefore starting to build quite a nice longitudinal survey of data sets where we can start to see some trends, differences. We tend to keep a similar core data set and questions each of those 2 years that we run. So you'll see momentarily when we get into some of the findings that we start with strategic priorities and how they might be shifting. We'll also then talk a little bit about some of the service offering and experience lens that maybe organisations are focusing on, what that might mean in terms of the structure of HR shared services. Are we maybe moving to more of a GBS model? Is there something in that? Or are we seeing lots more activity around in-country models as opposed to hubs? We'll also explore a little bit around governance, continuous improvement, skills, digital. We recognise, Dawn and I, that digital is a key enabler of a lot of the things that shared service professionals want to focus on, i.e. service excellence, for example. So we'll cover that a little bit. But as we said at the top of the call, please ask questions as we go through, and we will try to answer those. Some of them we might actually end up answering through subsequent discussions. Others of them we can kind of pick up as we go. But each of the data sets for each of those 3 surveys that we've run is very much from an HR shared service director point of view. So we only send this report and the questions data set to HR shared services directors. So people who are responsible for strategy and also budget holders. So they really give us a nice perspective around what some of the challenges, opportunities and focus areas are. So without further ado, we will go into some of those strategic priorities as well from our research. And we had about 34 different organisations participated, around about 50,000-ish employees tended to be the average data, sort of main data size of those organisations. Private sector was about 70% of the organisations, but again, that varies year by year. We don't discriminate. We go to public sector and also charities, but it also depends on who responds to those. And we'll pick up a little bit around who's using what technology as we go through our findings as well. So in terms of strategic priorities, focusing first of all on what might be some of the key business drivers and objectives really of shared services and HR shared services directors. So we ask this question every year, and it's perhaps not surprising given the premise of shared services that over the past 2-3 years, we've very much seen that the top 2 priorities are the same. So they're around operational efficiencies and improving the employee and manager experience. Probably not a surprise, but hopefully good to see that it's still very much important. We also asked 2 additional questions this year in here and gave different options around considering the broader business context. So when Dawn and I thought about the question set for this particular report this year, we wanted to make sure that we really made it resonate with what was happening more broadly in the economic environment. So for example, the need to maybe reduce operating and business risk and also perhaps focus more on productivity. So those were some of the business conversations that we were having, hence we included them this year, and you therefore don't see them in the 2022 data set. But what I'll do in a moment is just ask Liam and Jo for your perspectives on this, because as I said, there are some things here that are very much kind of a given. You would expect to see that, efficiency and experience probably come out as the top. Cost reduction is at the bottom of the priority list. Respondents could choose multiple options. It wasn't that we only said you could choose one of these sort of 6 or 7 different options. But I'm very curious, Liam, what is your perspective on some of this?
So yeah, to your point, Emma, I'm not massively surprised. Certainly, the first two answers being really high percentages. Certainly for me and for us as a business, operational efficiency is our priority. It is at business level, but it certainly is for me and my team's level as well. As is, and secondary actually is the employee and the manager experience. So my reflection was, I wonder if when we look towards the right of what's on everyone's screen, is thinking about that lower scoring question around implementing changes which help improve workforce productivity. it's kind of implied potentially, and an output of the first two, certainly for me and for us. So that was, if I think back to when I completed the survey, that's probably the lens I had. One of the things that I was reflecting on further as well on cost reduction, it could, for me, I think everybody wants to manage their costs really well. So I wonder if it is a language point when some of the those that have completed the report have answered, because certainly for me, I wouldn't approach my role and the strategic priorities I have in terms of cost reduction, but I would say I'm responsible for optimizing costs and making sure that the team, the technology, everything that I organize or we organize as a function is optimal and efficient, but isn't necessarily to reduce costs. So it's just something to reflect on a little bit further as to maybe why that's a little bit lower than some people may expect. But yeah, that's so overall, very much aligned for me, very much aligned to what the report's showing here.
And I know when we spoke sort of before today's call and sort of shared some perspectives, Joe, you also were saying about that cost reduction piece, and maybe it's language, or actually, in order for you to do the things that you need to do as a leader of people services, you have to invest. So actually, it's not about taking cost out; it's putting cost in.
Absolutely. So I don't disagree with anything that's been said. Liam, I'm 100% behind you in terms of those top two. Yeah, the cost reduction side of things. So that's not something that's on our radar at all. It's about efficiencies. It's about the experience that we're giving in terms of the service that we're providing. We absolutely are going to have to hammer in some funds in order to get our technology platform in a better place, because it's not quite fit for purpose. So it's not about cost reduction at all for us at UCL. We're going to have to invest quite heavily. I think we're going to talk about it later, but we're looking at enterprise service management activities, which is going to replace our ticketing system. So that's going to cost an absolute fortune. But the end point is better service delivery for the customers. So yeah, I think it might be terminology in terms of cost reduction.
But I think if we think back to sort of 10, 15, even longer, years ago when shared services was originally stood up, a lot of it was around how do we optimize costs, wage arbitrage, for example, through offshoring. And there's lots of good benefits of doing that. But ultimately, if you're trying to think about efficiencies, effectiveness, and also improve experience, it's that balance. So it's quite, when Dawn and I looked at this, I think we both thought, it's quite encouraging to see that actually the cost reduction piece does sit at the end, and we recognise that we do need to invest to make those changes that we want to. But the title of this webinar was called What's Keeping HR Shared Services Leaders Awake at Night? And we will delve into more of that over the next sort of 45 minutes or so. But I think what links nicely to the title of our webinar is this question here. So this is a new question in 2024. We haven't asked it in 2020 or 2022 in our past surveys. But Dawn and I were very keen to understand what some of the greatest challenges were. And this was one where you could only select one option because it was trying to help prioritise the biggest challenge that HR shared service directors might be facing in our research pool. And you sort of highlighted it a little bit there, Joe, or alluded to it, technology. You're thinking about investing in some technology. And the biggest challenge, according to our data set here, is current technology or digital enablers just aren't fit for purpose. And we'll talk about digital a little later on in this webinar. But I think when we get to that, there's always going to be something, from the digital landscape to optimize because technology is moving so fast. So there's definitely some things in there that we can explore a little bit more. And then there's, second highest on this list is around gaining sufficient investment, which I think leads again to that conversation that we've just had. Around this isn't about taking cost out, it's about investing to enable us to achieve our strategic objectives. Whilst people were only able to choose one priority, what's quite interesting here is articulating the value of shared services is perhaps at the bottom of this list of challenges. I guess what I'm quite interested to understand, Joe, is thinking about bringing the change, the team along on the journey, articulating the value of shared services. Is there more we need to do in that space? And is the data maybe masking perhaps this is still a journey that organisations are going on?
Totally. I thought this was really interesting. So I totally get the two top points that we've just talked about and we'll talk about later. But for me, this was really interesting, and appreciate that you can only pick one. But the articulating the value of HR shared services for us is absolutely key. So we're doing quite a lot of work around our operating model. And we're quite unusual in terms of our existing model. We've got sort of like, I call it a three-legged stool. So we have our central HR function with your COEs, and you have the HR shared service function, which is my area in the hub. And then we've got another couple of hundred HR people, or sometimes not HR people doing some HR activities out in the faculties and departments. And that's giving us real challenge in terms of how we provide an end-to-end service to our customers. And the whole thing about bringing our team along the journey, that is quite challenging for us at the moment, because we've operated in this way for a number of years. And what that has given us is a very fragmented service to the organisation. And we're trying to look at how we bring those activities together. In amongst all of that, it's absolutely vital for the hub to be able to articulate what it is doing for the organisation. So the hub is a shared service function. It was set up about 5 years ago to operate in that way, but it hasn't really got off the ground. It was really just, it's been a group of functions transacting and doing their activity. What we need to do is articulate the benefit of having HR shared services in that hub, and bringing along those faculty and department people so that we've got some consistency and we're operating in a sustainability place in terms of what we're offering. So yeah, it's challenging. We've got fragmented service offerings, and that's given us some reputational challenges. So whilst we're doing lots in the technology space, we do need to get back to some basics, which is something that is also quite challenging. Am I talking about lots of challenges? That's why I like it so much. It's so interesting. So many opportunities. Exactly.
Exactly. And just before we go on to sort of service offerings, it's a very nice segue, Jo, when you talk about the fact that you have got slightly different or fragmented, offerings of service right now. We will talk about sort of what shared services are doing in that space, what new services they might be offering. I guess from my point of view, there's also that need to constantly re-embed ways of working, because you can set up shared services and your business partners will be doing certain things. Shared services, therefore, operates in this way. The COEs are doing this if you've got an audit model. Unless you reinforce some of those behaviours, you start to unpick, I guess, some of the really good things that have been put in place. Now, that's not explicit on here, but I wonder if some of that might be linked to, so what's the role of shared services, for example, here. So service offering. So as I said, Jo, nice segue into service offering and client centricity. And yeah, Dawn, really interested in your perspectives on this as well.
Absolutely. So we see that shared services continues to expand into specialist areas, which is something we've seen, in our past reports as well, which is very positive. I think in most cases we can say, those brilliant basics are already in place. They were the first in, they're easiest to transform, etc. And it's about getting those brilliant basics right. But now we're seeing a trend really in more of our specialist services. So expansion into employer relations, mobility, or in fact improving the overall experience themselves. So very positive to kind of see that trend. And when we look at channels, for example, in 2020, we really talked about concept of contact your way, which is still the case. And that preference for channel use has not really, remained much unchanged over the past 4 years, and very much still being 3 being that magic number there. But we do see that there's much more of a need to balance that personal experience, i.e. contact your way, with productivity and the actual effectiveness of those channels. So I think, Jo, this is something you're looking at, aren't you?
Yeah, so this is something that UCL as an institution is trying to drive, and because we've got this three-legged stool model, the academics in our faculties and departments, they're a very strong force across the institution, and the academics particularly don't like to self-serve. They don't like to pick up the phone. They don't want to go onto our website and our knowledge articles to find the answer themselves. They're not interested in doing that, and probably never will. What they want is a walk-up service. They want to walk up to Billy Smith and say, I need help with some real basics, recording a holiday, or what do I do if somebody's off sick, etc. So that is an interesting challenge for us, because whilst I'm sitting in the centre trying to push for more self-service, we're trying to push for greater knowledge articles on our website. We are trying to bring in technology that makes that really, really easy to do. Our push is that we've got academics in the organisation who have this strength that don't want to. So my challenge is that as we try and build a better operating model across those three areas, the central, the shared services and the faculty, local departments, we've got to try and bridge the gap in terms of offering a service for everybody. So actually the magic number 3 actually might be 4 or 5 for us, because of the complexities and the size of the organisation. And I think what we'll end up doing is absolutely investing in the self-service technology, but we will also end up having walk-up services so that we can meet the needs of the customers. Because at the end of the day, that customer experience is really important to us. That's why we're here. But it is a really interesting dynamic. And when we talk later about digital, I've said that some of our basics isn't quite right. On the other end of the spectrum, I've got robots generating my contracts, and it's a real interesting conflict for us operational people.
Absolutely. I think in terms of chat, we still see that it's quite relatively low, at about 35%. Liam, is that something you're seeing as well, or what's your model?
Yeah, so I think there's certainly a curiosity for chat and various other forms, but very similar to Jo. I think what's really key when looking at this data, certainly, and reflecting on channels in the profession we're all working in, is the context and the culture. So in a slightly different way, but with a similar principle to Jo, my business, Utility Warehouse's business model is based on word of mouth, generating business through word of mouth and relationships, talking to people. And so when we think about the service we provide to our employees and internally, it would be irresponsible of us to go all the way digitally. We want to retain some element of human contact, and that's what our employees need and want, some of our leaders need and want. So when we think about chat and other channels, it is for us, and I think I've heard from some of my peers in other organisations in the profession, is about finding the balance of being really clear and selecting on the right technology or the right digital channels, alongside not losing the value which often exists in some of the interactions Jo was describing, even with email, because you can get a lot from email. A lot of my internal customers really, really value that channel. So we just need to, it's very much a balance. I think we said balance a few times. It's very much a balance when it comes to this, really taking a step to leverage the latest and upcoming technology, but not losing sight of what is it that actually matters to our teams, and realizing that and being very alive to that continuously when it comes to suggesting chat or any other type of self-service.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in terms of that experience and those journeys and the focus, that we're seeing over the next 12 months, really we're seeing HR shared services taking a bit more of an increased formal responsibility for people experience across HR, and really putting more emphasis on that line manager experience as well. I think most organizations have a dedicated employee experience role. About 59% we saw have that, but there's been a real positive change as to where that now sits, and that reporting line being into HR shared services, which is great. And we saw that trend really come up from about 44% 2 years ago to around 57%, which is great. In terms of employee journeys, the top areas continue to be welcome me, enable me, and help me perform and grow. And a bit of a shift really around enable me. While it's still important, it has dropped down from 73% to 59% as well. And that's pretty much an area where most organizations start, because it's kind of catering for your daily needs, items like that you need to process, absence, for example, and payroll queries. But when we think about the line manager journey, the emphasis really is around manage and support my team, and that's a real top focus area. A big shift has been in the areas of talent, performance and reward, and really on maximum my team's potential and recognising my teams as well, with only 1 in 2 organisations, saying that those are the focus areas. Do these kind of resonate with you, Liam, as well?
Massively, yeah. So I think we are at probably the beginning of the journey of really focusing on the experience of the line manager and the employee, but we have already started to look at the trends and what matters most to the different personas that we believe exist. I'm always slightly subjective to talk about personas, but something and starting very in a very simple way. An example being, we identified that there is a part of our organisation where employees are really not understanding or not digesting how their first pay works, or how to read their pay slip, and that's a fundamental need, and from an experience point of view, and being welcomed usually obviously in the first month or the first 2 months. We want our employees to really feel enabled, on page with probably the most important thing for an employee, being paid. So just took a step back and considered, are we doing everything we can to not what we think, but what the employee needs to educate, advise, be clear on, both from a self-service point of view, so that's a check back point, but also from a where's the in-person opportunity to step in, and how do we design a journey that accommodates that? Because the trend is that's not a one-off thing, that is a repeated need to look a little bit more closely at that. So that's just one example. What I would say from my early experience of looking at employee experience and line manager, the journeys, is to start with something really small if you haven't already done so. I'm sure people on the call there'll be a mix, but people will have lots of experience in this. I'm certainly at the start and love to hear more from anybody else. But if it can be quite overwhelming, what's really key for me is starting with something small and working out what the journey is on that small thing for that small population, and deciding if it can be replicated thereafter. But this is very much a focus area for us.
Absolutely. And payroll obviously being quite critical as well. So a great example there.
Yeah.
And on the topic of payroll, if you're responsible for payroll or you work in payroll, we do have a webinar next week, Wednesday the 15th as well, called Payroll, the Mystery Behind the Magic Button. And we have some guest speakers, similar format to today. So and please sign up. You can find the link on our page. So moving on then, because I know we're kind of running out a little bit of time here, but let's kind of have maybe a look at the trends around structure, the operating model, kind of focus on governance and that continuous improvement piece, Em.
Yeah, thank you, Dawn. And thank you for the nice little plug around the payroll piece as well. Be bad, we'd be remiss not to. So again, this is something we ask about every year that we do this survey. On the topic of structure, in the report itself, because we don't have a lot of time today to go into everything that we cover in the report, you will find as listeners a number of different stats, a narrative around the percentage of FTE that might sit in HR shared services out of the whole of the HR function. There's pieces around global business services, onshore, offshore, so lots of different things in there. But essentially what the data continues to tell us is that a hybrid of virtual networks and co-located teams continues to be the preferred service delivery model for HR shared services. And we did ask questions around, do you as an HR shared service director intend to change that over the next 12 to 24 months? And the data shows that there is limited appetite to change that. So it must be working, I guess, is what we can kind of take from that. In terms of briefly sort of the proportion of FTE that might sit in HR shared services, the data, and again, there's more in the report itself, says that most organisations manage around about 40% of the total HR FTE. So quite a sizable chunk of the HR FTE. Clearly, that might vary in your organisations for those of you listening who maybe need more of an onshore presence and are maybe smaller. So it might be that you've got someone who's a business partner as much as an HR shared service person, i.e. hybrid type roles. But again, some interesting stats in there, should you wish to have a little bit more data on that from a benchmarking standpoint in our report itself. But one of the things that did really jump out this year was this global business services piece. So over the past sort of 4, 5, even 6 years, I definitely have seen clients that I've been working with, and I know, Dawn, it's the same with you as well, this ongoing question of, should HR shared services become part of a global business services model? And there's lots of reasons why that might be the right thing to do. But again, what is really happening in the marketplace? And when we started the research in 2020, as you can see here, very few HR shared service organisations were formally part of a global business services model or GBS model. Moving on 4 years, that's increased to nearly a third. So over time, we may well be seeing a shift possibly in either the appetite to do that or the need to do that. Only 1 or 2 organisations answered no in the sense of they'd been part of GBS and now actually had gone back into a functional reporting line. So there's something interesting in there that we can perhaps unpick a little bit more in a moment, because I know, Jo, you've mentioned that your people services team is part of the hub, which is a broader GBS model at UCL. And we also asked, what was the main strategic driver to move HR operations into GBS? The main 2 were leveraging cross-functional technology, such as service delivery platforms. So if you're thinking about investing in technology, which I know, again, is something very appropriate for this call, for both yourself, Liam, and Jo, you're both looking at that for service delivery tech. Doing that as a multifunctional business case can actually be a lot easier to do, to prove the value case for that and the investment for that, as opposed to trying to do it in a more of a functional line. There's lots of pros beyond that in terms of service effectiveness, one unique experience for someone raising queries, as much as also the cost and investment piece. But also improved governance came out as, again, one of the main strategic drivers. And what's interesting on the governance piece, which we will talk about briefly, is when we looked at the 11 or so organisations who said they were part of GBS in our research pool, nearly all of them used operational measures. So 10 of them used operational measures and 8 of them used experience measures, i.e., I think what we can take from that is there appears to be a more robust governance model if you're part of a GBS organisation than perhaps if you're purely managing HR shared services within the HR function. As I say, we will look at service measurement momentarily, but that is interesting to start correlating some of those 2 data points. But Jo, really keen in your sort of experience, your perspective as to some of the benefits that you're seeing as part of being part of a bigger hub, so part of the GBS world within UCL.
Yeah, so there are. We are on a journey though. So as I said, the evolution of the hub started about 5 years ago, and it really just was a collection of transactional activities from functions, i.e. HR, finance, and some IT, into a hub. And it's never really, it's just festered in some respects. It's never really got to the point whereby it was a true shared service function part of a GBS model. But we are definitely on that road now. And some of the things that you've said, Emma, are exactly the reasons why we're doing it. So we've got to come out of our functional silos and operate a service model that can be cross-functional. It's interesting at UCL, so we have Oracle as our people system database, but so does finance. So we're on the same platform, but those two things don't join up and talk to each other. So one of the things that we are looking at as an institution is going down a different ERP route. I've also mentioned ESM. So this is where, so I mentioned that we're quite fragmented in terms of our service offering. What we want to be able to look at is the customer journey and the experience, and heightening that experience and giving a one-stop solution to an individual. So a new joiner, for example, might actually have to go 15 different places in order to get their ID card, their laptop, their single sign-on. Our ESM platform, this project that we're working on now, is going to tie all of that in, and it'll end up being cross-functional, so that as a new starter, I can go to one place and all of those things will happen for me. That is a seismic shift for the institution, and will bring with it some cost savings, although we talked about the fact earlier that we're going to need to invest. For us to invest in an ESM platform, it's going to cost us quite a lot. But the other thing that we're looking at around, excuse me, is that not only were we looking at the hub functionality and the service offering to the institution, we're also looking at our strategic change capabilities, which was all over the place and quite technology driven. So in parallel to looking at what we were doing and how we were going to structure the hub, we have also looked at our strategic change activities and create a funnel whereby all of our change requests go in through a governance mill to identify what resources and funds we can in order to support them. So doing some prioritization. All of that is what I would consider part of a GBS model. So it is quite an early journey for us, but we're going in the right direction. And it's fascinating to have conversations, because there's lots of interesting perspectives from the finance world, from the ISD world, from the commercial world, because of course everything that we do, we want to see value. So yeah, that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour in terms of how that's going for us at UCL.
Thank you, Jo. And you've touched a little bit on governance there, which I'll briefly just show a summary slide on, because I'm conscious that we've just got over 15 minutes to go and there's so much more we want to talk about, skills and digital being the next two topics post this. So very, very briefly, the headline here, as I sort of alluded to earlier, is organisations are building much more of a holistic view of service effectiveness. So not just looking at the traditional measures of operational efficiency, but also thinking around maybe what that means in terms of how you measure experience. Because as we said earlier on, in terms of strategic priorities, shared services is looking at both of those dimensions. But what is interesting is, I think if we look at the data historically and therefore the trend, 1 in 4 organisations still isn't measuring anything. So that in itself is an opportunity area potentially to consider. But also, again, thinking around the mechanisms that are in place to do that, because sometimes, you just don't have access to the data. As we've started to talk about, data might be in disparate systems. It's not easy to pull that all into one place without lots of effort. But are organisations thinking around continuous improvement Our survey data says they absolutely are. We've actually seen a shift in that from just over half of organisations having mechanisms in place to support continuous improvement in 2022 to more than over half of that now. So there's been a shift in that, and also that links quite nicely to some of the skills and behaviour priorities that we're seeing. But I guess ultimately my takeaway from this personally is we talk about the value proposition of HR shared services. If you can only really truly say how successful you're being if you're measuring something. So those 1 in 4 organisations that aren't measuring anything, it just makes that conversation slightly more difficult. And actually starting with the smallest things can sometimes make the biggest difference in particular. So maybe it's using forums to get information as much as also then what the system might be telling you around, the conversion of queries based on what someone's looking at in terms of the knowledge articles, for example, that you might have on your portal. So there's lots in there. Again, we don't have time to go into lots of detail today on our webinar around this in particular, but there's more in the report. And if anyone has any specific questions for those of you listening live now, please do put them in the chat and we'll see if we can get to them on today's call. So moving on to capabilities, behaviours and talent. Again, this is something we ask every year. I recognise there's lots of information on this slide. Again, more in the report. But we asked around the skills that might be a priority for now and also the behaviours. So skills and behaviours tend to go hand in hand. And what we're seeing is that customer first mindset, being a trusted advisor, is still kind of top of mind. So the top 3 skills are continuous improvement, customer service, and data interpretation and analytics. And then also that links quite nicely to behaviours. So, they do sort of mirror each other. We asked 1 or 2 new pieces here in terms of options. Artificial intelligence we included this year due to more of the increased focus on that. Since 2022, we've seen a lot more in the AI space, particularly generative AI. It's kind of the new kid on the block in the digital enabler space. And I know there's already been a question, I've seen it in the chat, around what we're seeing in terms of AI usage in HR. And we'll come on to that when we talk about digital in probably about 5 minutes time. But also 1 or 2 things to highlight here. We've seen collaboration really move quite a lot in terms of one of the key behaviours. So it's gone up in the ranking table to 4th place this year from where it was before. It's 7th 2 years ago. It's now 4th place this year, with over 50% of HR shared service directors saying it's a priority. So that's quite a shift, probably not unsurprising if we think about working holistically as one HR team and more broadly outside the HR function, but quite nice to see. We also ask around career development as well in our research. And again, this is something we've been looking at over the past couple of years. So most organisations, unfortunately, still do not necessarily have a formal career pathway in place for their HR shared services teams. Now, I say unfortunately because I think that might be an opportunity area again when we think around really celebrating what HR shared services can do and really investing in the teams to be the best that they can be. And you'll see on the right-hand side lots of different ways that leaders are investing in the development and retention of their HR shared services teams. But just very briefly, for sort of 1 or 2 minutes, Jo and Liam, question to you both. Given that the top skills priorities have remained the same since 2020, because that's what our data has told us, customer first, customer service, data interpretation, continuous improvement, and also we've not seen really a shift in the dial necessarily around career development, is enough being done? Do you think this is an issue? And if you do, why? And also what might be 1 or 2 of the things that the both of you are working on, just for 1 or 2 minutes. So Liam, I'll start with you first, if I may.
So I think first of all, I'd say certainly for me, there's always more that I'm sure in the profession that we could do. I think what's really important to call out is when we talk about continuous improvement, we talk about a customer first mindset, which is definitely a capability that I'm wanting to attract and nurture with the existing team. The challenge actually, or opportunity, is that the context of that, and we use that word again, changes. So in the last 2 years, I would say what we mean by customer first mindset in my world has shifted and evolved. So therefore the capability shifts and evolves, and that's why I think it remains a priority. The very quick example would be, from my team's point of view, we have focused very, very much on the experience of starters and leavers last year, the year before last. Last year, we really stabilised our attrition and labour turnover. So actually, the customer first mindset has had to be adapted to people that are staying with us. And so I just think there's more we can do, but it's an evolving agility we need when we talk about these capabilities, for me, certainly.
Thank you, Liam. And Joe, to add to that, your perspective.
Yeah, so similar in terms of continuous improvement. So that there's two focus areas for me. One is I'm getting my team leaders and my team managers to go through Six Sigma training so that they can start to do process re-engineering and looking at how to do things differently and better and more efficiently themselves, rather than parachuting in some CI people that can do it for them. The other area is customer services development. So I'm pulling together with my OD colleagues a program around customer service and what that looks like. Because my guys, since COVID, have become very much hidden behind Teams calls. And I mentioned earlier about this walk-up service provision that is being requested of us. We're not in that space at the moment. So I think my guys have probably lost a little bit of that personal touch over the last few years. So I want to reignite that and get them thinking about who they're dealing with and how they deal with those customers. We don't, unfortunately, have a defined career development pathway program in place. It's absolutely something on the agenda. And again, that is one of my priorities for this year. One of the significant challenges I've got is that, I've mentioned we have HR roles out in the faculties and departments. Unfortunately, those roles are of higher grade than what I offer in my function. So I'm seeing a real seismic shift, and I'm hemorrhaging people because they're leaving HR shared services and they're going and getting a higher grade role out in the faculties and departments, and that's causing me some operational challenges. So what is right at the top of my list in terms of priorities is making sure that I've got proper grading and proper role profiles for the work that my guys do. Because whilst I'm very supportive of people developing their careers and going elsewhere, I've got to balance that with being able to keep the ship running and delivering a service.
Yeah, not an easy thing to manage. Lots of different challenges or opportunities, as you say, skills, digital, keeps us on our toes, and which I know is why both of you do the job that you both do. So we will move on to digital enablers in a second, because we talked a little bit about that being a key skill. And also then the behaviour around that and what that means. If you're interested in hearing more about some of the talent pieces, there's more questions that we asked in our report. They're in chapter 7 of the report itself. We ask about where talent might be coming into HR shared services. So Joe, you talked about talent that you're losing out into other parts of HR and the business. We also sort of see trends around where talent's coming from and into HR shared services. So just signposting that for people who might be particularly interested in talent. But digital, we've had a couple of questions on this. So Dawn, I know we're going to talk a little bit about AI. So hopefully that will touch a little bit on the question around, are we seeing an increase in the usage of AI? And again, Joe and Liam, your perspectives on that. And then I see Stuart's just asked a question around, which HR services, Liam and Joe, for example, you would prioritise in putting in digital versus what you'd keep in human contact, which I guess is back to that, it feeling personal and how you might do that. So I think we'll probably pick up on both of those as we go through this last part of our report, Dawn.
Absolutely. So in terms of digital, we see that, organisations are really continuing to expand their portfolio of technologies. But as you said, there's still some work to do to close that opportunity gap with AI and more advanced analytic tools as well. We see that perhaps the types of technology has increased since 2022, from between 2 and 4 to more around between 3 and 6 this year. And the most frequently used technologies remain the same. and consistent in all our reports as well. And that really being knowledge management, reporting analytics, and document management tools. Whereas, the use of RPAs and AI still remains quite low. We see that organizations are exploring those more mature and advanced analytic tools and reporting capabilities, such as Tableau and Power BI being most used, whereas those kind of more specific analytic solutions are only really used by about 15% of our respondents as well. So what's that say to us? I mean, looking ahead, the portal, Tier 0, and recruitment onboarding are top areas for investment over the next 12 months. And there's been a little bit of a decrease in investment in live chats, chatbots, case management, and knowledge management. Liam, does this surprise you, this data? Is this something that you're looking at as well? Anything surprise you here?
So I think really interesting to reflect on, because alongside what I shared at the start, culturally we really want to find the balance of human interaction, and I can see that is a really great question from Stuart to talk more on, but also how we can optimize technology. So we definitely want to, and actually one of my priorities this year is to select the right service delivery technology, but a one that's going to be well received within the business, and that really helps us find that balance between where we want to have those interactions and where we need to enable self-service, knowledge management, possibly stretching into other areas such as live chat. So that's for me really key, really important this year, and what we are prioritizing. So resonates with me, this part of the report, Dawn, and talks to the fact that this is a priority for us in Utility Warehouse.
Absolutely. I think before we wrap up, because I know we haven't got very long left, it wouldn't be a trends webinar if we didn't talk about Gen AI. We did include this year, obviously, a number of questions around that, because we know it's the next big thing for service delivery, and we really want to know what's happening in the HR world in this space. We found that about a third of respondents are currently using AI. Of these, all but one use chatbots, which is, the typical entry point that we see into exploring AI in shared services, and one of the more established offerings in the marketplace that we have. But really, Gen AI is still in its infancy in HR. It's really baby steps. People are, dipping their toes, as it were. There may be some pilots that people are running, and really only 15% are actually using it in HR shared service processes as well. And that's really around the query, knowledge management space, employee admin. It could be in talent interaction by going through CVs, etc. So really still in its infancy, and we link it back to the skills. We know that we need those new roles, as we said, in shared services to support that implementation of AI. And make sure we've got those data sciences, people analytics, skills, etc., and invest in that capability so we can build those more on those solutions. It was, we did find also that mainly 2/3 of people said that they had no plans to implement AI over the next 12 months. So really not too much of a change. So still lots to do in this space, and really find, it's very, very untapped, and, people are very much resistant to do it, and maybe they're just looking at pilots and trying to find ways to do it. So yeah, still lots to come in the area of Gen AI as well. So Emma, looking ahead, I know we don't have very long in terms of those future priorities.
Just the last couple of minutes. Absolutely. And interestingly, when you talk about AI there, one of the things that you'll see in a second, on this call is we asked what will be critical to success over the next, 12, 24 months, fixing brilliant basics. So data being part of that. And that might be one of the reasons why, again, at the moment, we're not seeing a massive uptake of Gen AI, because there's got to be some priority focus on getting the real foundational pieces in place to get the best value from some of those things. So the key area for investments in terms of budget over the next 12 to 24 months, probably not unsurprising, is digital optimization. I say probably not unsurprising because we saw that that was one of the key challenges at the very beginning of our webinar today. Now, our technology and tools just aren't fit for purpose, so we want to invest in improving them. We've talked a little bit about that. Probably could do a separate webinar just on digital, to be honest, which maybe we will do in the future. So that clearly came out as number one, but then supported by that, optimization and standardization of processes, because to get the best out of technology, you've got to make sure that you've got consistent processes, that they're as streamlined as they possibly can be, for example. And I think both of those two things link quite nicely to, what will be critical to success over the next 12 to 24 months. So lots of different options that respondents could choose from here. And they range from, further automation and standardization, fixing brilliant basics, to covering things such as investing in new skills, also thinking around actually how do we invest in our own teams, HR shared services teams, creating that culture of curiosity and innovation, and where you might source talent from. So lots of different options that were given. But again, I think there's a constant theme that we're sort of seeing through this year's data, which is we want to continuously improve. In order to do that, we need really strong foundations, which is that fixing the basics point. It's cited by over half of respondents. It's second on this list. That we included that as a new question this year because it's something that Dawn and I had a lot of conversations with our clients about, that they still needed to focus on those things. So we thought, well, actually, is that a common theme, or is that just unique to the clients that we happen to be working with? But it's not. It's a very consistent theme. And it may well be that in 2 years' time, that is still also second on this list, because there may always be something to do in that space. So time will tell. But that, just to explain the context of that, is on there. And then also, what's interesting here is there's been a bit of a shift in particular around ensuring a great employee experience for shared services teams. That's dropped a little bit. That might just be because of other priorities. But again, there's lots and lots more in the report itself. There's a few sound bites, some sort of case studies from some of the research respondents in there that bring to life some of the things we've talked about. Obviously, Joe and Liam, we could have continued talking for more than an hour. That's always the case on our webinars, which hopefully is a good thing. There were lots of questions in the chat, some of which I know we've covered, others we haven't. So, for example, I've seen a question around why case management's decreased. We may well just put a little bit of kind of post-webinar follow-up to answer some of those questions as well and bring to life. But as you sign off, here is a quick QR code for those of you who might not yet have registered for our payroll webinar, which will be next Wednesday. And thank you very much to Liam and Joe for joining us today, for sharing your insights. It's been great having you on.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks, guys. This is the end of the webinar. Of course, if you've got any questions, please feel free to let us know. But I'll just leave that up for another second or two for the QR code. And then we will say thank you very much. And we'll catch you, hopefully some of you next week when we run our next webinar on payroll, the mystery behind the magic button. Thank you very much. Goodbye.